for joining today with another episode of My Story. Today I have our guest, Joe Bauer. And Joe is a road warrior. So I don't actually know what Joe does, but all I know is he travels around the country. He's a fitness guru, and he's living in his souped up van and going to national park and doing a push-up at every single national park, I think. Right? So it's a very much of a life a lot of us are envying of. And I just have him coming in today to kind of talk about how he get to where he is and really dive into what does Joe do for money, or what kind of business he runs as well. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So Joe, can you tell us a little bit about what you do? Like just kind of in a nutshell what Joe kind of does. Yeah.
Yeah, so nutshell, I am a partner in the Seattle Investors Club real estate investment community that Julie Clark and I have created. And I also have a company called the Get Better Project, which teaches people to work out online at home with very little to full home gym style equipment. So in a nutshell.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you also have a blog called a Van Life, right? Yeah. And then
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
yeah, that's
Yeah. Yep.
interesting. We're gonna look at it too. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, the fantastic life. So years ago we were coming up with like, what are we going to theme this project or experience we're doing? And we sat down with all of my family at a retreat actually outside of Lake Wenatchee,
Yeah.
and we just brainstormed what sounds like a good name. So we came
Yeah.
up with fantastic, and rolled with that.
That's awesome. Cool. Awesome. So I am going to go way back to your childhood because you live a pretty non-conventional life, I would say. So way back to kind of your childhood or, growing up, what is kind of the influence, like what is your kind of family background which allows you to be so free-spirited?
That's a great question. And I grew up with a father that worked for Safeway and a mother that was a teacher. And when I was very young, I started out going to preschool, and my mother decided that she didn't like the school system at that time. So
Mm.
she actually pulled me out. And I should also mention, I'm one of three children. I'm the oldest. So I
Uh-huh.
was the one breaking ground for my siblings. And my mom pulled me out of school and homeschooled me. So I was homeschooled on a 5-acre piece of property out by Woodinville, now out near Duval, Washington.
Mhm.
And she basically taught me as much as she could based off what she knew, and then she hired tutors when she didn't know the subjects, or the subjects got too advanced for her. So I spent my days playing, doing sports, out around the yard and doing homework when I actually wanted to. So it was like, I
Mm.
need to get this done from a very early age, and I could decide, do I want to do my work and learning in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening? And I had to make those, or I could make those decisions for myself. And that was very interesting. And I went through that process until high school. My mom and dad actually said, hey, you can start school whenever you want to.
Mm.
And I decided that I wanted to go to high school because mostly for the sports and like the social interaction. And so I
Mm.
started my first schooling, or conventional schooling, in high school. So that's
Mhm.
kind of an interesting start.
Mm.
But I also did sports with people that were in school. So it wasn't like I had no social interaction. I interacted with other homeschoolers, and I played on like the junior high or junior high basketball team, and I played for like the select soccer and baseball. So
Mm.
I had all of that going for me, which, is the social interaction a lot of people don't get when they homeschool.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, because I think if you homeschool, there's a lot of sports extracurricular activity. That's one way to kind of have the children interact with other kids as well. And I actually found the people who homeschooled turned out to be more excellent when they kind of joined the high school rim and whatnot. Because my husband's mom is a teacher as well. That's what her comments was. Homeschool kids actually tend to be a little bit more on the upper curve when they kind of join the school. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I got to high school, I actually told my mom that it wasn't a very good learning environment for me, and that I probably wasn't going to get very good grades, not because I didn't want to apply myself, but just because I didn't think it was as beneficial as doing, what I had done before. And she
Mm.
basically told me, all right, that's fine. Thank you for like letting me know. And that you can, you'll probably have a better time once you get to college. And that was always like from the beginning, my
Mm,
parents have said, you're going to go to college. That's it. Like you have to make it through there and then you can decide what you want to do after that. But like,
mm.
as far as like an agreement that we had, and that was
Yeah.
totally the case. I was like, high school to me from a learning standpoint was not very interesting. And then I got to college and thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, interesting. So tell me a little bit more like what that transition is like for you because you kind of like decided this is not really for me, but you have to go through it. So like what is that transition and what particular was something that you find really challenging?
So for me, and you're talking about like the high school and going
Hmm.
from homeschool to high school,
Yeah.
yeah. So I would say there were several things that were challenging in that it was a new environment. Like I was used to learning in a situation where either I would go and learn something like history, I'd go there and I'd see it and then I'd write a report on it. I wouldn't have to
Mm,
like, and I could read books too, but there was all this immersive form of interaction. And if I
hmm.
needed to learn math or something, I would go and you and I would have a meeting and you would, show me in person. It would be like all this one-on-one, like very,
Mm,
uh, very interactive learning environment. And then I got to high school and I'm in this group of people, 25, 30 people in a classroom and a teacher trying to teach all those people and
mm,
not being able to help me personally if I had a specific issue that I was working on because she's trying to help all of the people, which I
mm,
understand the issue that you go down there, but it
mm,
it also bred this environment of trying to get grades from pleasing what the teacher wanted. And I
mhm.
wasn't used to that at all. And it kind of goes into down the road of wanting to be an entrepreneur because I didn't really care what the teacher wanted. I wanted to do good for myself. I wanted to learn the subject. And a lot of it was getting through the classes and getting a good grade rather than learning the subject in its entirety so you really felt like confident about it. And
Mhm.
that was the big challenge for me. So I had things that I still love to do and learned in high school that weren't necessarily a part of high school, if that makes sense, just
Right.
because I thought
Yeah.
they were more important.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And what are some of the things that you think it kind of contributed to today? Like even, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always had little projects going on. Like I was a big like kind of mechanics nerd. So I had like little RC cars and things like that that I would build and I'd learn about electricity and how that worked in those because they were battery
Hmm.
powered and then how like the systems all work together. So like it even from like entrepreneurial standpoint, like how does one system like a transmission work with the motor and how does the
Hmm.
electricity power those things? And then to me that's like all right, like we talked before, that could be having an employee and how does that employee work with me or work with the
Hmm.
videos that I'm asking them to edit and that
Right.
system working together.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's pretty interesting because I can already see like how your mind works, which is like taking one thing and they kind of apply to the other conceptually,
Yeah.
which is amazing. So kind of fast forward into college. And you mentioned that you actually liked college. For a lot of people who I interviewed that was successful, they actually quit the college during the time because that college was supposed to prepare them for a job, which is the reason why they quit the college. But for you, what was kind of fascinating about the college, and then how did you kind of see that fit into your kind of non-conventional life moving forward?
Sure. So I went to college having no idea what I wanted to do, like absolutely zero. And I was playing baseball when I started college. So I went to college to play baseball at a junior college because that's where I got a scholarship for. So I started
Mm,
off at a junior college and still had no idea what I was going to do. And that led into transferring down to San Diego State, which is where I got my degree in kinesiology, which is basically exercise science.
mm,
And at that point, I still had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that I liked working out.
mm,
So they had just happened to have this great program for working out, a lot of professors that were getting work published and whatnot. And I
mm.
thought, oh, I'm interested in that. I don't know what it's going to do for me, but I like
Yeah.
learning about it. I like working out myself. I like teaching people to work out and see
Mm,
results in their physical body. And so I went down that road not knowing or having any idea what I was going to do. I ended up getting a degree. I liked the process of just it was a hobby for me and that turned into something that I could, get a degree in. And that's
mhm,
basically why I liked it. And then my having high-end professors that you could have really great conversations with. I just stumbled into going to San Diego State because my brother was going there. So my
mhm,
parents were like, "How about you go here?" And I'm like, "All right, sun and beach, sure, why not?" And then they
Yeah.
had this cool exercise science program.
Right.
It was like small classes and you really got to work with people. And I spent time in like labs, like testing blood work and lactate thresholds and like,
Yeah.
having these big masks on while you run on the treadmill and going like in dunk tanks and like measuring your body fat. So like I was geeking out on all this stuff and I
Mhm.
didn't know what I was going to do with it, but it was super fun. And that's why I like college, because it was interactive and I had teachers that were really interested in what they were teaching and I got to interact with them, and ask them questions
Mhm.
and really learn about the subject that I was interested in,
Mhm.
and that when I got through that, it was like, what am I going to do? And I had, all right, you can try and go down to be a strength coach at a university or like for a professional sports team, or
Mhm.
you can be a personal trainer. And both of them weren't really awesome, ideas for me, because personal trainer basically meant you were a salesperson, which
Mhm.
ended up actually being beneficial later on.
Yeah.
But then, and working as a strength coach meant many years of making zero money
Right.
in order to build up to like this strength coach position or head coach position, where then you are at the whim of being fired when a new regime comes in. It's like,
Right.
well, this doesn't make sense.
Right. Right. Or like
So
not being performing, like all these national
yeah,
news that we heard about. Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you like I think that was very interesting. Again, it's a little unconventional. Like, so if you have to think about, like, I'm guessing who is the person who kind of give you the most influence, allowing you to kind of think about as in like, hey, there's an objective, something I'm interested in, so I can just kind of go do it. I think, a lot of us, especially me, like bringing up in an Asian family, there was like, hey, you got to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. That's basically it, right? And so you follow that path, and then later on, you discover this is not something that you want to do forever.
Yeah.
So who kind of influenced you the most, and then how did they kind of go about it?
Yeah,
Um,
that's a great question. I would feel like when I was at that age, I wasn't necessarily influenced that much, other than that I had an upbringing similar to you, where it was like my grandpa was a doctor. I had, my dad was running a high level position, management position for a groceries company. And that was kind of like my parents' objective, I think, but they also
mm,
had this open mindset that said you can do whatever you want. Like I remember my mom being like, you can do whatever you want, you can be an astronaut if you want to. So
yeah.
I kind of took that seriously and thought to myself, well, I don't really know what I want, but I am being influenced by, this grandfather that's a doctor and my father that's working really hard for this company, although it
Mm,
doesn't feel right. Like I never felt right about having somebody tell me what to do all the time. So that
mm,
was a limiting thing. So I don't feel like I really had influencers until later on, like
mm,
after I reached my point of no return, where I was like, I can't do this anymore.
mm, mm.
I'm sure we can lead into that.
Yeah, and then I was just gonna say, what is that point of no return? So like you graduate from college, I guess you become a personal trainer,
Mhm.
and that's the path you chose. And then so kind of tell us a little bit about your like what kind of leads up to like the transition essentially.
Yeah, so because there wasn't much else to do, I decided to become a personal trainer, and
Mm-hmm.
that I remember at that point, I actually really wanted to. I thought it was really cool to be a personal trainer for whatever reason. And I got a job at 24-Hour Fitness, and it was really just this toxic work environment, but I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do it so bad. Like motivation is a really powerful thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
really, really wanted that. And I had goals and I wanted to be like a full-time, make a lot of money, be a personal trainer.
Mm-hmm.
So I would cold call from 24-Hour Fitness. And you have to understand that I am an introvert at heart. Like I've taught myself to public speak and to be a podcaster and a blogger and all this stuff and be on a lot of videos. But if you ask me where I recharge my batteries, it's like being alone and like
Mm-hmm.
having my own time and, being in the woods and that type of thing by myself. So I had to get myself out of the comfort zone, cold call. I even had a point where I would go up to every single person in the gym,
Yeah.
no matter what they were doing, and be like, hey, have you had your free personal training session? And I would do it to everybody. Like everybody knew me. And that is
They're like, oh no, Joe's coming.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that is so unlike my personality, but I wanted it so bad that I broke through that barrier and I learned a lot
Mm,
about myself at that point. And that led into actually an opportunity that I was a contract employee at the San Diego State University at their gym. So I was
Mhm.
basically running my own business at that particular location.
Mm.
And that taught me about, having nobody to rely upon but
Mm.
myself. So
Mm.
I had to like take those skills of talking with people and apply them to my own systems, and like, what was I going to charge myself, and all of these, ideas that were foreign to me at that time. And that led me into, actually, I long story short, I followed a girl out to New York City at some point after that, moved to
Yeah.
New York City, got a job at a place called the Sports Club LA, which is right in Rockefeller Center, as this like high-end personal trainer.
Mm.
And that in and of itself led me into, again, doing things on my own. So I branched out from there to be a high-end executive trainer for myself. So I would
Mhm.
go to people's that had a lot of money, to their apartments, their apartment gyms, and train them personally. And that was about when I started reaching this breaking point. So it started with like, all right, I know that I can't work for somebody at the
Yeah.
Sports Club LA, at this club. So then I went on my own, and then I realized that I couldn't make as much money as I wanted to and have as much time as I wanted to,
Mhm.
the time freedom. So I was
Yeah.
making at the time, which seemed like a lot of money, like $150 an hour to work with somebody. And I couldn't work anymore. I could do like 6 or 7 hours a day because there was travel time, and
Yeah.
I just couldn't do any more to make any more money or to bring any more time into my life. Looking
Mhm.
back now, I'm like, oh, I should have just hired somebody, and I should have, had built this business up, but
Right.
that wasn't where my mind was at the time. And I remember sitting in this 400 square foot apartment in New York City that
Yeah.
was just, chaos for me as an introvert, just New York City chaos,
Yeah.
and breaking down. Like, I literally just like couldn't do it anymore. I was stressed, and I'm not a stressful person
Yeah.
usually. Like, I'm usually just like easygoing, people come to me that are stressed and I calm them down. Like, that's my personality type. But
Right.
I was stressed out. I I can tell you that I don't use the word hate lightly, but I hated what I was doing. Like,
Mhm.
it was really tough. And so I, at that point, decided that I was going to do something different. I had a really good best friend that was getting into real estate investing, and he happened to be coming out to Connecticut to do a fortune builders
Mhm.
event, and
Yeah.
invited me along. And I did it, and I jumped in head first and started listening to. Oh, here's another interesting fact: is I learned that you basically are the 5 people that you spend most time around.
Mhm.
So I looked at my life and I decided that I didn't know anybody in my life that I really wanted to be like, except for the one person. So I spent
Mhm.
time with him as much as I could. He was actually a client, very successful, taught me
Mhm.
about martial arts and like body connection. And then I listened to Tony Robbins.
Mhm.
So I listened to Tony Robbins in all of my free time. My life was basically personal training, listening
Yeah.
to Tony Robbins, and exercising. That
Uh-huh.
was it.
Yeah.
Even to the point where there was some point in my life, a few years later, somebody said, "Man, you sound just like Tony Robbins." I was like, "Well, makes
Yeah.
sense."
Yeah. You listen to him so much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I was doing things, like I was so unhappy that I recorded myself saying the goals that I wanted to achieve. And then I'd put headphones in when I'd go to sleep, and I'd turn it on really quiet. So I thought that I was like telling myself these like affirmations as I was sleeping. I was listening to it.
Yeah.
and and then I thought real estate was the next thing for me, so I broke into that. I dove into it head first. I started flipping short sales in New Jersey, which was like
Mhm.
the hardest thing I could ever imagine somebody trying to do, because
Uh-huh.
I would send actually a dollar bill in the mail to people and say, call me if you want to know what this is about.
Yeah.
And that
That's
gave
it.
me like, that was like a 50% response rate. It was
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah.
And people would call me, and then I'd say, oh, I'm interested in buying your house. I realize that you're, in for pre-foreclosure. And then you'd have to go and get them fill out a stack of papers like this big.
Wow.
And we had a team together. So we had a guy that had money, and we would go out and I'd, I'd market, put the deals under contract. He would provide the bridge loan. And well, all during that time, we were lining somebody else up to buy the property. So we do
Mhm.
a 24-hour bridge loan and then double close essentially on the
I
property.
see. I see.
And it was terrible because I had a fitness vocabulary. I didn't know anything about real estate. I was having to learn real estate as fast as I could and get
Right.
people to, believe me. And then at the end of the day, try and make some money doing it. So
Yeah.
I'm grateful for it looking back now, because I had to learn really fast on my
Yeah,
feet.
that's like a big hustle. Yeah, like you're hustling, like huge hustling. Yeah.
So much hustling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and then it was a build up process. So I was like at my bottom, and I was somebody that's super positive, and I couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And so I turned to real estate and started building myself up and listening to Tony
Mm.
Robbins. And
Yeah.
that was where it, started going back up for me.
Yeah. And then so what kind of keeps you going? I'm guessing that affirmation was kind of really important for you, like looking back, like because it's tough, like like going through this fix and flip, because all day long people's going to tell you no when they call you, and also the amount of volume that you kind of have to hit is pretty ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had some really, I don't even remember where I learned this, but I had a routine that when I'd get up in the morning, I would meditate for, I forget exactly how much time. It was like 30 minutes. And then
Hmm.
I would do 30 minutes of visualization right behind it. So I
Hmm.
read a book called Psycho Cybernetics, I believe, by Maxwell Maltz. And he talked
Hmm.
about like how you could visualize and get your body to feel what you're actually accomplishing, and then it would make it easier for you to accomplish those things. So I
Hmm.
got into that routine, and that, for whatever reason, motivated me so much that I was able to break through these barriers. Like I remember sitting at my kitchen table in New Jersey at the time and cold calling investors and
Hmm.
having them say like, I'd be like, hey, yeah, are you interested in buying any deals from me? And they're like, oh yeah, what do you have? And I'm like, I don't have anything. Like, call me back when you have something. Bye.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
having that conversation so many times, I'm like, shoot, you know,
Yeah.
but it was such a building and learning experience.
Right.
And yeah, I think it was just the visualization and like the writing of down of my goals constantly. I had like yellow notepads filled with every single day. I'd write down all my goals
Yeah.
every single day to the
Yeah.
point where they were just memorized. It was like I'm a robot here going after a target.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is very important. And thanks for sharing with us that mental aspect of it. One thing that we kind of have our member doing in Easy FIU is like learning the habits that kind of makes up to like the miracle morning, routine, which
Yeah.
is kind of the short version of it. Obviously, people should have freedom to do one or the other exercise more if they feel like they needed to more. But when I recall back, that was the most productive I had when I was actually on the routines and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So moving forward, when you hit that low point, um you then get into another super busy job, right? Like I don't think you were working any less, right? But motivation has changed a little bit because you're hoping like there may be a goal that for you to kind of build up to it. What was your goal back then when you're like doing all that flip? Is it simply how many you're gonna flip, or is there like a higher goal? This is a way to kind of move to where I want in the next stage.
Yeah, so at that time, I was so motivated by figuring out something that wasn't an exchange of time for money. And that
Mm-hmm.
was, so if I was making, I forget, let's say $100,000 a year, I wanted to figure out how to make $100,000 a year where I wasn't dependent upon trading that time to get that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my major driving factor. So I was to flip these short sales and then to put that money into rental properties.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, I did that, and I had accumulated 4 doors out in the East Coast, and then 2008 hit and struggle bus
Oh.
happened, and I actually
Mhm.
lost all of them. So
No.
I've gone through the, having been foreclosed upon myself situation, which is never fun, but super learning, experience. I don't mind sharing that at all with people. I tell a lot of people that, especially newbies, and they're like, oh my gosh, did that
Yeah.
happen to you? I'm like, yeah, but I wouldn't trade it. Right. I learned
Mhm.
so much going through that process. And even now, like, I would have had so many more strategies today than I did in 2008 to
Mhm.
have, saved those properties and have them be awesome assets at this point.
Right.
Um, but you had to go through those things. I was a fitness guy doing
Yeah.
real estate. So
Yeah. So, we're kind of coming upon another periods kind of like that. So what would you say, like if you advise yourself in 2008, what would you try, like a sum of the strategy? Can you kind of share that with us? So what would your advice be for that person there to kind of potentially save the property, let's say? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I was in a position back then where I didn't have a lot of resources as far as knowing people. And the
Mm,
properties that I was buying were they were in great locations, but they weren't right next to New York City where I was living. So I had to like drive about an hour to get to the particular properties that we were buying. But I was trying to jump straight from the not spending time on them. I wanted to buy them
mm,
and have them be turnkey and have someone else manage them for me.
yeah.
Looking back now, I would have told myself to go get my hands a little bit more dirty. Like if I
Mm,
couldn't find somebody that was putting those, putting tenants in there, go and do some of the work myself, right? If the
right.
property management was sucking, rather
Mm,
than just losing income, get out in that area, go spend a weekend trying to find more property managers or
mm,
doing some of the work myself, which I know that we're all like, all right, we don't want to do all, we want to be smart about it. We are in our time and we want to hire people to do things we're not good at.
mm,
But there are situations, especially back then, where the internet wasn't as good. We didn't have as much
mm,
resources where I could have just gone and done something. Or if somebody that I was hiring to do the renovation, like paint the apartment before a new tenant comes in and they're just not doing it and they're taking my
right.
money, I could go in for a day, buy some paint at Home Depot, throw that on there and get it done and get a tenant in there.
Right.
And next thing to know, the tenant is actually paying me money.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of situations like that where I try to jump from, professional investor maybe too quickly,
Mm,
in a world back then where there wasn't enough resources for me to do
yeah.
that. So I would have gone in, got my hands dirty, and done a little bit more work on the ground, which I should have probably done up front, but not
Mm,
knowing that,
mm.
hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Because I think that's also as in apartment syndication, the stuff that we do. That's what I noticed too. So lease up is still always a problem, and that's
Yeah.
to distinguish between you and other competitors. So oftentimes, sometimes I even post ads on Facebook myself, even with large apartments.
Yeah.
So definitely, like sometimes you got to kind of just get in and get your hands dirty for sure to kind of save because these are hard earned money that
Yeah.
you have. Yeah.
And I also wish too that I had better mentorship.
Uh-huh.
Like I wish I had somebody like you to talk to, be like, hey, this is what's happening. What should I do?
Mhm.
And you're like, go get it done, right?
Yeah.
Just even to kick me in the butt and be like, yeah, get on boots on the ground and go find somebody to manage the property that's better than the one that you've got. Or, if you got a tenant that's waiting to get in there and you need to show it, go slap some paint on there. Like, get yourself a little dirty. Who cares?